welcome. Moss Adams is pleased that you joined us for today's webcast, Performance Measures for Success and Sustainability. Before we begin, I'm going to play our housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our slide deck and handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And now I would like to turn it over to the presenters to get us started.
Hello and welcome. I am Scott Simpson. I'm a partner with Moss Adams. I've been working in the higher education industry for 25 years, most of that time as an external financial statement auditor, and have more recently moved onto the consulting side. I have worked with private institutions, public institutions, community colleges, and for-profit institutions. So quite a few years of background amongst a wide array of organizations. And with me, Tammy, go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Scott, and thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Tammy Lohr. I'm a senior manager in our business consulting services group, and I specialize in helping mission-driven organizations, including higher education institutions, improve their performance. And Scott and I have both been working really closely with a lot of higher education clients to help them understand, really thinking about what to measure and how to use performance measures to help improve their operations and their financial sustainability. And we're so excited that you're here today so we can share with you what we've been learning, what we've been experiencing out in the marketplace, and we hope that some of the information that we share today can also help your institution.
Great. So today we're going to talk about performance measures in higher education. We're going to touch on some strategic planning. We're going to touch on performance measurement development and some different examples of performance measures. We'll talk a little bit about dashboards. And really to get us started, higher education institutions have access to just huge amounts of data. And while most institutions are able to communicate educational performance measures like retention, graduation rates, and other available data, oftentimes there are other measures that are left untouched and could really be useful to organizations as they look at their mission and their strategy and just how they want to move forward into the future. So here. There we go. Learning objectives. Develop meaningful performance measures rooted in strategic plans. Again, we'll talk about strategic plans, and then we'll jump into some performance measures. We'll review how performance measures understand the holistic institutional performance and how to tie those things together, and then assess operational changes and how to improve performance in a timely manner. And okay, so we will get started with performance measures in higher education and just a high-level overview. The first question that I think we all need to ask is, how do you measure your institution's success? Do you measure it through graduation rates? Do you measure it through enrollments? Do you measure it through financial performance? And as we go forward into this presentation, think about those three things. Which are the measurements you currently use, and what should you be using to move forward in this environment today? So as we said in our introduction, the introduction video, we do have a number of polling questions, and we are going to start off with our first polling question, which is, I would characterize the performance measure environment at my institution as A, strategic and impactful, B, focused on accreditation and compliance, C, siloed and function specific, or D, time sensitive without commensurate value. So you should have the poll up on your computers, and go ahead and answer which one fits best. We'll close the poll when we have about 80% or so, maybe give it a few moments longer. But to get CPE, we do need you to answer this polling question.
And I'm really excited to see the results of the folks that are on the webcast today and really understand where your institution is at. If you're at that 1A of strategic and impactful, we'll want to maybe follow up with you and see what your performance measures are looking like and what your framework looks like and how you put it together as well. So we're really interested in the results of this.
Yeah. We've got about almost 90%. We'll give it a few more moments here. All right, let's take a look and see where people are at. Good, strategic and impactful. Very glad to hear that almost half the people on the call are consider their performance measure environment at their institution strategic and impactful. But for the rest of you, we'll cover some things in the coming slides that may give you some ideas on how to improve the performance measures at your institution. All right. So as we think about performance measures in higher education, we know that we have access to a significant amount of data. We are generally good at measuring student outcomes, and we know that there are specific reports required for accreditation. But oftentimes, there is a disconnect between outcomes and costs and performance. And so over the coming slides in our presentation, we'll discuss performance measures that may help your institution eliminate that disconnect. Why performance measures? So if we think about the current environment in higher education, enrollment declines, we're seeing that across our client base, we're seeing that across the country. There's obviously the evolving job market, increased operational costs. If your institution has not experienced this already, you are an outlier. I've been talking to a lot of institutions as of late, and inflation is really wreaking some havoc with budgets, especially for items that they have been able to, at least consistently over the last few years, estimate. And now those estimated costs are just skyrocketing. Reduced state support. This is for public institutions, community colleges. It's been a trend for many, many years. And then on private institutions, another bullet would be reduction in contributions. So those are the things that are really driving the current environment. So going back to why performance measures, well, performance measures can help accountability and stakeholder communication. Performance measures provide communication outcomes and achievements to these stakeholders. So it provides an ability for you to communicate the things that you're doing, the things you're doing well, and the things that you want to improve upon. They drive continuous improvement, provides valuable data if you're looking at continuous improvement, and you're able to inform decision makers within the organization on things that you need to focus on and how those things really tie to the strategic environment and the strategic mission of the organization. You can use performance measures to help with accreditation. Certainly some institutions are focused on those college rankings, and performance measures can help drive that. And then funding and resource allocation. Really understanding what your funding is, where the funding shortfalls are, where you could be at risk, and then really how to drive resource allocation. And that's something that's really key. We're starting to see a lot of institutions across the country focus more on, I'll call it strategic resource allocation as pressures on budgets build. It becomes harder and harder to divide up the pie, and organizations and institutions need to be more strategic in how they think about that. And so performance measures can help in that endeavor. So questions to ask, and this is really kind of a primer into the coming slides that we'll talk about. But think through as we talk about the next 10, 20 slides, is your institution achieving its goals and providing students education and the promised experience? Is your institution financially stable with resources aligned to those strategic priorities? Do you have strategic priorities that everybody is driving toward? And then finally, how do you know these things? And that's what really performance measures and strategic planning can do for you. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tammy to talk through some of these things. Tammy?
Great. Thank you, Scott. All right, so we're going to turn to talking about how strategic plans and performance measures are really linked up and help inform one another. So starting out with really talking about how to create a really strong strategic plan. Without a strategic plan, your performance measure framework can change and make it really difficult to assess performance and operations over time. So strategic planning really is a foundational piece of developing performance measures for your institution, as well as, of course, defining your institution's trajectory, future goals, and sustainability. Because of that role, we usually see strategic plans last about 5 years in length. Some are a little bit shorter, some are certainly a little bit longer, but in general, right around that 5-year mark. And here we're just highlighting some of the elements that we find help make a strategic plan really impactful. So first, and probably foremost, stakeholder buy-in is critically important. So who is at the table for these discussions? Whose input is being included and considered as we're shaping what's important for the future of our institution? We obviously expect our leaders to be highly engaged in a strategic planning process. That includes, of course, your vice presidents, your deans, your board members. But we also want to hear the voice of other staff from your shared governance groups, as well as students themselves, potentially through student administration. So making sure that the right people are engaged in the process will help create that sense of buy-in for everyone across your institution's community, which is really important in sort of shaping the strategic plan, but even more important for manifesting and operationalizing those strategies when the time comes to it. We also want strategic plans to be forward-looking, so understanding both where have we been and where are we going. Is our mission and vision still reflective of what we want to achieve? What are the goals that will help us operationalize these broader aims that are articulated in our mission and vision statements? So the strategic goals and objectives in your plan aren't the space to have those vision-like statements such as, we want to be the premier institution for research on the West Coast. Well, what does that mean? So instead, we want to really think through potential goals like we want to grow our research from X dollar to X dollar, or increase our research by 20% over the next 5 years to become a premier institution for research on the West Coast. And that really dovetails nicely into the next box here on the slide. So that strategic plan should have specific and measurable goals and objectives. And those should then be backed up and tied to a core set of performance measures. So again, thinking through what is important for us to be measuring, how do we know if we're making progress towards our goals? And ideally, at the level of your strategic plan, we should be focusing primarily on outcome-driven goals. Some of those may have different output factors like number of students enrolled or dollar value of research, but in general, we want to be focused on what are the outcomes that our institution is producing. The last element that we have here is implementation plans. A lot of times we'll see strategic plans have accompanying implementation plans that really outline who is responsible for which components of that plan. And that can be helpful in sort of articulating how everyone at your institution should be working together and adjusting their operations to achieve those goals. Okay, so once you've got your strong strategic plan in place, you are ready to dive into the very exciting world of performance measures. And we like to think about performance measures in this triangle-like structure. So starting at the top, we want to look at measures that evaluate the overall desired university or institution results. These are almost always going to be, again, those outcome measures because they're showing how you're actually able to achieve your mission and your vision and how you're living up to your values. So what are we doing? How is it working? And what does it cost? Those are really the three inputs for this. This is where we're really able to look at the impact of our operations. So if we have a situation where all of your operational KPIs in those lower two levels are looking really good, but your overall university metrics aren't in alignment, then we need to be considering what are our operational strategies and why aren't they producing the outcomes and the results that we really are hoping for. And that's where we get into this cycle of performance measurement as a mechanism to help support continuous improvement. The typical audience for the measures at this high level are executive leadership, your board, and then of course the broader community. It really gives your institution an opportunity to showcase where you're excelling and where there might be some potential risks or opportunities to improve. At the next level down, we have programs and services that help support these larger goals. And this is where we're really able to operationalize our strategic plan. These metrics tend to be a little bit easier to measure by looking at things like outputs and outcomes at that program or service level. So the questions that we're trying to answer here are what are we achieving and how efficient are we? So examples of these measures might be enrollment by program, section fill rates, graduation rates, or cost per student FTE. So here we're able to look at outcomes, outputs, and those efficiency measures. And something that can be pretty important that I know Scott will be talking about a little bit later on is making sure that we're evaluating at least our college and our academic programs in as close to an apples to apples way as we can, so that we can understand how each program really fits into our institution's strategic plan and set those goals for each program. So for example, we might have a program that costs a lot of money per student, but maybe that program is our flagship program, or maybe it's something that we're really well known for. And so that might be okay that we have that higher dollar cost per student, but we need to be able to understand that and be able to articulate why that fits into our institution's strategic plan. And that really goes into sort of that stakeholder communication and buy-in into this process as well. The last layer of the triangle here looks at individual activities that are done within specific programs and services. And often these end up relating to things like employee and team performance goals. So we don't see a lot of this information published or available online, but it is important to include within this framework because these are the people that are actually able to help operationalize your goals in their everyday activities. So maybe we want to know how many prospective students someone in admissions connected with, and maybe how many of those connections translated into an actual enrolled student. Or in advancement, how many donors was someone engaging with, and what's the average dollar amount of their contributions. So again, we want to showcase this on the slide. A lot of times we can sometimes see a new strategic plan. It's got all these great foundational elements, but if we aren't bringing it down to the employee level and making sure that employee goals and performance is also being evaluated in alignment with the strategic plan, we may not see the success that we were hoping for with the strategic plan and being able to achieve those goals. So ultimately, it's our employees that can help us be successful. And so we want to make sure that that's reflected within this framework. And we are going to go to our next polling question. So similar to the first one, we are now very interested in sort of understanding your sense of your institution's strategic plan. So does it include those well-defined objectives and goals that I was just talking about? Is it sort of in the middle where it's got some defined, some are maybe a little bit unclear? Is it lofty and ambitious? Are we using it? So is it being used by leadership or not? Or has it expired and doesn't exist? So this is something that we're really curious about, since it really does set the foundation and the framework for setting up your performance measures. And we're gonna talk about that several times over in today's presentation. I think every single one of my slides, I'm gonna say, turn to your strategic plan and then define some performance measures. And I know a lot of institutions, oh, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just gonna say, Tammy, one of the things that I'll just comment on, I've seen, at least right now, I see the wide range of strategic plans from having been expired and one has not yet been developed, or they're in, institutions are in the middle of a strategic plan that maybe is from 22 to 27. And I'm seeing other institutions that are developing new strategic plans as their old one is starting to come to an end.
Yeah, there really is a wide range. And I've also seen some institutions say, okay, we have a strategic plan, but we developed that before we had a pandemic. And so a lot has changed, and maybe they're trying to revisit that plan and do some updates as well. All right, so let's see what y'all have to say. All right, we've got, again, about just under half of the audience today has a pretty good strategic plan, which is excellent. And then just a few where you're sort of, about a third of you are in the middle there, where you've got some really good areas and then some other areas that feel maybe a little bit squishy. So that's great feedback. Thank you. All right. So We're going to now talk a little bit more about different types of performance measures and give you some example performance measures. So today we're going to cover these 3 types of measures. So we talked about outcome measures that really articulates the so what of our organization, financial performance measures where actually performance measures and key performance indicators were really born. That's where a lot of this work started out in. And then operational measures, where we're able to look at things like efficiency and effectiveness. So I'm going to start out by talking about my favorite category, if you can have that, which is outcome performance measures. So again, your institution's strategic plan should be outlining your goals and your vision. And this is where performance measures can be especially impactful for leaders to first establish the baseline, where are we at today, and then be able to evaluate their progress towards these goals over time. This is our opportunity to speak to how are we achieving our long-term goals and creating the impact that we are hoping to within our communities. Outcome performance measures will have the most institutional variation because they should be rooted in your mission, your vision, your values, and ultimately your strategic plan goals. They should be unique to you and what your institution is specifically trying to achieve. For these to be successful, we need to have a very clear and unified understanding of our goals. So often we'll be working with a client to help set up a performance measure dashboard. And we, through that process, discover a lot of different nuances within these goals and different considerations to potentially include. And that's great. And we work through that, and then we want to make sure that we are coming to a decision and that we are figuring out how to incorporate or not incorporate some of those nuances, but most importantly, that we are documenting that so that our goals and the way that we're measuring our goals are both very clear and we're able to replicate them over time. These are also not things that can typically be achieved in 6, 12, or even 18 months. We might be able to see a trend over that time, but really we're talking about measures that would take the duration of our strategic plan period to achieve. So again, thinking about that 5-year timeframe. We've got some sample and best practice outcome measures here. A lot of these I'm sure are pretty common and you're very familiar with, but some of these are just sort of ideas for thought for you all. So graduation rates, student retention rates, very common to be able to measure those pieces. With that third area down, we've got employment outcomes. This is something that we're seeing a lot of institutions really pick up. So metrics like the percentage of graduates employed within their field of study, that can be pretty tricky to define and pretty tricky to sometimes track down that information. And similarly, the average starting salary of graduates can also be a little bit tricky to track down that information. But we also want to take into consideration that when someone finishes at least an undergraduate degree, that they don't necessarily go into the job market. They might be going into advanced studies. And so we want to be able to reflect that here as well. And these measures are really all designed to look at the relevance and the effectiveness of your programs in preparing your students for the job market or for whatever advanced studies they have next before they go into their careers. We found these to be really great tools to communicate that output, to communicate what we're contributing to society as a whole, to these individual fields. But we've also found it to be a pretty handy recruitment tool for new students if we're actually able to track this data, which again can be a little bit challenging for some organizations. We also have passing rates for licensure exams, graduate and professional school acceptance rates. So again, how competitive are our programs? How are we setting up our students to be able to be successful on these additional ways to get the licenses that they may need or pursue those advanced degrees. We're also seeing institutions assess student satisfaction directly through surveys or other feedback mechanisms, with the idea being that a positive student satisfaction may indicate a high quality educational experience. And the next one that we have on the slide I did want to make sure that we talked about, and that's diversity and inclusion for both students and staff. Especially given the recent Supreme Court ruling, we do want to be able to at least consider how our campus is really reflecting diversity and inclusion. So looking at inclusivity of students, faculty, and staff from diverse backgrounds, including metrics like the percentage of underrepresented minority students, gender diversity, international student enrollment, or other initiatives that your campus may have for promoting diversity and inclusion as well. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk about some other measures.
All right, as Tammy indicated, we're going to cover 3 types of performance measures. She just covered outcomes. We're going to talk about financial right now, and then after these few slides, we'll talk about operational performance measures. So financial performance measures really help determine, is our institution financially healthy? Answering the questions, do the financial resources we have, are they sufficient to support our mission? Do we live within our means? Questions like, are we dipping into our resources, our reserves? And are we really where we want to be? So examples, we do have, and I'll get into some of these in the next couple slides, but KPIs that indicate long-term financial health and sustainability. We've got KPIs related to student financial aid and need, enrollment target achievement and growth. So with that, let's jump into a very busy slide. I've got a couple busy slides here, but a lot of these have been around for years, these financial ratios. I think a lot of people were introduced to looking at these in concert with one another in the Prager and Seeley Higher Education Ratio Analysis book that first came out 25 years ago-ish or 20 years ago, really linked some together to come up with a composite score to determine institutional health. Some institutions use that. Some institutions just pick and choose some of these to track. But what I would say is, as you go through and you look at these, you really need to tailor these for what's applicable to your institution. And I say that because public institutions have different performance measures maybe than private institutions might have, or community colleges. And so one I'll point on to here that really highlights that difference between institutional type is this last one, fundraising expense to contribution ratio. Probably not super applicable to a large public university, but applicable to almost every private institution out there. And if you're a private institution and you're not tracking this, I certainly would highly recommend that this is something you take a look at. I have encountered many private institutions over the years that have not looked at this. When we've discussed it, it's been, I'll say, an eye-opening surprise that their fundraising expense of $750,000 generated $600,000 in contributions for unrestricted, and they realized it didn't even pay for themselves. So really, look at this, and these target ranges are just guides. So again, I'll use as an example this fundraising expense, no more than 35%. So if your fundraising department has about $350,000 of expense or costs, it should be generating $1 million in revenue. That's that 35%. On this slide, we've got 6 financial ratios. On the next slide that I'll get to in a moment, we have another 6. So we're providing 12. I would not recommend that 12 is what you that you commit to and you track actively on a regular basis year over year. That's an awful lot. Pick the ones that are most important to your institution, provide the most meaningful data for your institution's management and board. And then I would develop those 6 or 7 that you think are best, whether it's 8 or 9, it's all up to you, and start to track those. You have your past financial performance. You can go to your audited financial statements and do kind of a history. Where have we been over the last 5 years with some of these ratios, and where do we want to go over the next 5 years? And how do these financial ratios really track with your strategic plan? And as Tammy said, one of the elements of a great strategic plan is a core set of performance measures. Well, financial ratios, this would be one of those core set. So this next slide, once again, we can see here a bunch of additional ratios, equity ratio, portion of assets that the institution owns. But then we can get into some things like net tuition by student FTE. If you haven't looked at this one, I would definitely at some point in the near future run this calculation, see where you're at, maybe see where you've been over the last 5 years. It'll provide some useful information. Net education by student, and then tuition discount ratio. The tuition and discount ratio certainly is an important one to be looking at. And this is one that actually prospective students may look at as well. And I've actually seen this highlighted on a number of university websites in the admissions area. So again, these financial best practice performance measures are just a tool. One of, like we said, there's 3 types of performance measures. This is one set, but they're really integral to defining a holistic set of performance measures. So from here, we're going to move to operational performance measures. These really help us determine whether our institution is operating effectively. Are we providing high quality student experiences? Are we providing the right employee experiences to be able to hire and retain quality employees? Are we hitting our goals? Are they research goals? Are they enrollment goals? So there's a lot of different things you can measure on the operational side. Examples, KPIs related to student recruitment and enrollment, as it's indicated here on the slide. We can also measure student engagement, as well as administrative type KPIs. So I'm going to move to our next slide here. Here's a list of some student KPIs, some administrative KPIs, things to consider as you look at your organization. What are you currently tracking? And maybe what should you track going forward? I think a lot of institutions already are looking at year over year enrollment. What are the enrollment trends? We've talked to, Tammy and I have talked to recently some that are having declining enrollment trends, how to turn those around. And then I've encountered some institutions that are having increasing enrollment trends and looking at capacity and how do they either build capacity, make capacity. Career placement, that's a one that students will look at, prospective students. What is the efficiency of career services in helping them get a job once they graduate? Academic support. Another one on here that I don't think many do track, mental health support, the availability and efficiency of mental health services on campus. that could be a really important one for your institution. And then administrative and operational KPIs. Employee turnover, again, that's one that everybody is looking at, I think, on a pretty regular basis. They know it. But really, are you measuring employee engagement? Because engagement really helps drive employees to either stay or at times go. Average length of recruitments, recruitments of professors. How long does it take? What's the process? And the quality that you're getting, and how long does that take? Average length of month-end close. This is one that kind of crosses from operational into really impacting the financial. How long does it take your accounting department to close month-end? Are you doing a full close of month-end? Or are you doing a quarterly full close? And then faculty to admissions ratio is another one. So these are just, again, an example of operational performance measures. Your institution you may look at your institution and say, gosh, there's other ones that are important for us that are embedded in our strategic plan that we want to track, and that's great. This isn't meant to be a complete holistic list. It's just some ideas as you start to think about performance measures and how they relate to that strategic plan and your organizational or institutional goals. And here we move to our next polling question. Most of the performance measures at my institution relate to outcomes, B, financial, C, operational, D, all of the above, or E, none of the above. And the poll should be live at this point. And Tammy, what I've seen over the years is a lot of institutions will have financial. They'll have maybe one or two outcomes and maybe one or two operational, but I would say operational is the least number of KPIs or performance measures that organizations are tracking.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I've seen with the clients I've worked with as well. And I think that operations sometimes can get lost, and it's challenging because that's where I see a lot of the internal service measures really show up. And those internal services are absolutely critical in enabling those outcome and those financial measures to show performance. And so I feel like there can sometimes be a little bit of a disconnect between those. And we want to make sure that we are looking at our internal services because they really do, they're sort of the engine of the car of our institutions. And so I hate to see them sort of not be recognized or looked at in a performance measure framework.
Exactly. All right, let's look at the results here. Wonderful that over half are measuring to some degree all of the above. And for the others in this list, hopefully we provided some examples of things for you to at least consider as you move forward. So the last slide that I want to cover related to kind of the performance measure component of the presentation is, we'll call it the program scorecard. And this is where you can take really aspects of all of those three different types of performance measures, outcome, financial, and operational, and start to apply it to the different programs your institution has. And if you apply it consistently across the programs, it really can give you some insight as to how those programs are really performing. So we're looking at the effectiveness of a program. Is a program sustainable? Applying these performance measures across programs will give you some insight as to, are they sustainable? Conditions impacting the market relevance of programs, as well as the competitive edge and how effective is your institution in delivering that program And the center here you see it all leads back to student learning. With that, I'm going to now turn it back over to Tammy.
Great. And I get to talk about how to actually develop performance measures and what's involved in that process. All right, so I just want to start out by acknowledging that the process of defining a core set of performance measures can be a little bit of a daunting task. So this is a process map that is highly simplistic and in many ways a little bit utopian, but does outline that general process. And many of you, about 40%, feel like you have really strong performance measures. So I'm sure that this process is familiar to you and that you probably have lots of areas where you're saying, well, it's not exactly a straight line. There's lots of areas where we sort of circle back and we circle and circle and circle, and then we are able to move on to that next box. But for those of you who might want some help with your performance measures, this is sort of a general framework to be able to use and apply to develop those. So to start out with, again, we're going to root everything in our mission, our vision, and our strategic priorities that are outlined in your strategic plan. I'm sure you're tired of me saying that at this point, but that's really going to help you convey what are you trying to achieve and then provide that foundation of what you should be looking to measure. After that, you're going to identify key focus areas, so just that functional area that aligns with the organizational objectives. These areas are likely to span the entire institution, so we're thinking about different functional groups, financial sustainability, program success, research, operations, so essentially all of the areas that Scott and I have already talked about in today's presentation. And when you're thinking through each of those key result areas, when we're doing this work, we work with our clients to consider, okay, this is the key area. What are the critical success factors that impact that area to help identify where we have dependencies and priorities for institutional leadership? So after we have some of those key areas defined, then we think through those critical success factors, and it's time to start engaging our stakeholders. So this could be, those that are in your cabinet or on your leadership team. Again, we want to think through every sort of group at the institutions, students and faculty, again, as well as your shared governance groups. So the idea here is to be able to seek input and perspectives on meaningful performance indicators and make sure that everyone is aligned on how we're defining and measuring success. This can sometimes be a little bit challenging. These discussions can be a little bit hard to navigate depending on the dynamics within your institution. So we often find that walking people through the entire process and really demonstrating as much transparency as possible is key to making these conversations really productive. So over communicating is a good strategy here. And I'm sure that for all of you who have that good set of performance measures, you say, yes, this is where we have a lot of those iterative circle backs. Look at this. What about this? What about this? So once you go through that iterative process and folks are mostly lined up on the important areas of focus and the success factors, we can start the process of brainstorming those potential performance measures as a small team while still involving our stakeholders. So oftentimes we'll have clients with different tiers of performance measures. So we have those top level measures shared with the board and executive leadership. Then we have those college or function specific measures for leaders like deans or directors to really keep a pulse on your operations in the areas that are within their control, and then understanding how those then feed up into those higher level metrics. During this brainstorming process, we want to emphasize that it is important to consider the feasibility and the relevance of each of these potential performance measures. So what data do we have available? How are we collecting that data? What is the potential cost of collecting or assessing the data that we need for this performance measures? So again, we want to be practical and have this performance measure framework be a really critical tool while not becoming just an additional task where the time and effort that goes into compiling the measures outweighs the relevant importance to the institution. So what information do we already have? What is the cost of getting additional information? Where is the information stored? How easy or difficult is it for us to be able to get that information and analyze it in a way that is impactful to the organization? So we need to be able to balance those different priorities. We hate to see organizations where the actual work of putting in that goes into analyzing and compiling the performance measures is more time intensive than the time spent analyzing the results and sort of using that for continuous improvement. So that's a disconnect that we want to just point out here. Once you have your list of measures, it's time to set targets. So we recommend that you look at the last 3 to 5 years of historical performance, understand where you've been, where you want to go, what's our path to get there. Those targets should still be realistic while also being challenging. Sometimes we'll see performance measures, but no targets, and that ends up being information rather than a decision-making tool. So we want to encourage all of you with performance measures to set those targets. This is really where we're defining what is success and having a shared definition for that. And then finally, of course, you have to implement your performance measures. And that includes defining exactly what that performance measure is. Again, what is the process for the data collection, the analysis, and the reporting? We want to make sure that that is consistent year over year or over time if we're doing it more frequently than annually in order to be able to understand our performance. And we have our last polling question now. And so this is just asking you what the potential barriers are for your institution to have really meaningful performance measures. So is it defining meaningful measures? It sounds like a lot of you already have those measures pretty well defined. I'd be curious about the consistency of those measurements, how stakeholders feel about your performance measures, looking at that actual data collection and analysis process, or manual and time-intensive reporting. So we know a lot of higher education institutions historically, sort of I would say pre-COVID, did a lot of this analysis and this work manually. But since then, we've seen quite a bit of investment in software solutions to be able to help make this a little bit easier. We're going to talk just very briefly about dashboards after this question. Scott, anything that you have typically seen in terms of performance measures or maybe some trends in this area with your clients?
I think sometimes the biggest hurdle is really a disconnect at times between what the institution is producing and what the board wants to see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really takes a lot of I'll say on the item number C, that stakeholder alignment, understanding what the board really wants, or even helping the board at times define what they really want to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's again where, we have those different layers and sometimes there can also be a disconnect with, okay, this is what the board wants to see, but we don't have that data, right? Like a lot of those student employment outcomes or what was their starting salary, the board may say, yeah, absolutely, that's what we want to look at, but what is the mechanism to be able to access that data? And it's inherently reliant on students to be able to go and provide that information back to your institution. And I've even heard of some organizations going out and doing a lot of LinkedIn research to understand where someone might have ended up 6 months after they graduated.
Yeah.
Okay. Last 5 seconds for this polling question, which is the last one that you need in order to get CPE. Okay, we have sort of a mix here that's mostly evenly split between these different factors. Okay, great. Well, hopefully this is helpful. And now, in the interest of time, I'll go into talking a little bit about sort of those last two pieces. So about half of you are interested in that data collection analysis process, as well as those manual and time-intensive reporting pieces. So of course, we're going to talk about some dashboards. And At this point, you're probably thinking, okay, this is great. We like all the ideas you have about performance measurement, but realistically, who's going to do this data collection and analysis? Again, we have a history of relying on manual processes here, but we're starting to get more and more technology tools within our higher education space to do this analysis on our behalf. There's a lot of data that is overwhelming to think about doing all of this collection, management, and analysis on a manual basis. So we do recommend that if you're investing in a performance measurement framework, that you at least consider where a dashboard may be able to help support that activity. So thinking through the data analytics platforms, we want to think through who can do that heavy lifting for you. There are a lot of systems out there. Some of them even have specific modules built out for higher education. Having these automated programs keeps data on demand for close to real-time view of your actual performance measures. And so again, the idea is that we are sort of using the information that we have, spending our time understanding the information rather than just analyzing it. To be effective, we usually see that dashboards should be measuring those pieces that are really meaningful to stakeholders, that they're being used by leadership and management to discuss performance trends and concerns, and ultimately to help make decisions that will help steer the organization. So there should be enough information to facilitate discussion without getting bogged down in the data. And really, we want these to be a mechanism to help facilitate those leadership discussions. So not just a reason to sort of look at these reports and give a thumbs up and then say, okay, well, what are we going to do about this thing over here? We want to be really investing our time at the leadership table in looking through these measures. And one final note with these dashboards is that you have to keep these up to date. There is a lot of time and resource investment that goes into creating the dashboard, creating the data framework to put this all into place. And so we don't want that to be set aside. We have found quite a few clients where they're like, okay, we did this 5 years ago, and now we're trying to revive this effort. And there's a lot that goes into that. And that means that for those 5 years, we weren't really using data to help inform our decisions. And that's not the purpose of these different dashboards. Okay, so to finish us off today, I just wanted to share a couple thoughts about the link between performance measures and budget development. So when we're thinking about how to integrate performance into our budget development and monitoring process, it's really considering how are we applying our resources to be able to achieve our goals. Higher education institutions, whether public or private, of course have limited funding and have recently been in a position where you've maybe had to make some cuts or look into your crystal ball and try to see what the future holds for your institution. So we would encourage all of you to be looking at how your available resources are supporting your goals. Are we seeing a difference in performance in the way that we want to? Are we on target? And if we aren't, then we need to have a discussion about why that is and how to adjust our strategy or our resource allocation to be able to see that meaningful difference. If you are interested in learning more about how performance and budget strategies can tie together, please join Scott, myself, and a couple of our colleagues on October 12th for another webcast that focuses specifically on different budget processes and ways to sort of link performance and budget. We'll go through a variety of different models and talk a little bit about those. With that, I'll turn it over to Lauren to close us out.
Great. Thank you, Tammy and Scott, for a great presentation today. As a reminder, if you would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them from the folder that says Slide Deck and Handouts. We will also be sending them out via email tomorrow, along with recording of the webcast. I also want to thank the audience for being engaged and submitting your questions. If we didn't have time to answer your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webcast. Also, feel free to reach out to our presenters if you have additional questions. If you meet all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 3 weeks, and you should if you have any trouble downloading it. Finally, here's a link to the online survey for today's presentation. Thank you all for joining our webcast. We hope you'll join us again next time.
Thank you.